you?
We might ask the same question.
Dark City doesn't get talked about enough. It's a 1998 film about a man who wakes up with no memory of who he is and has to piece together the mystery of his identity while stumbling around a labyrinthine city in which it is only ever night, all while being pursued by the mysterious and nefarious strangers. It's a creative artistic masterclass not only as a sci-fi movie, but also as a film noir. And it's definitely not going to be to everybody's taste. Not that stopped the studio from trying to make it appeal to as wide a range as possible, even if it was to the detriment of the original vision. Which, to hear Alex Proyas talk about it, it definitely was. Proyas claims in the director's cut audio commentary that Dark City wasn't really inspired by any particular movie, though he does credit Lawrence of Arabia and 2001: A Space Odyssey as being the movies that made him want to become a filmmaker. He was more inspired by classic sci-fi novels and loved the idea of mixing that with a hard-boiled detective story because that was just another genre that he also loved. His initial idea was for a story following a detective who's investigating a case where nothing adds up and he starts discovering clues that are insane and he thinks he's going crazy. But it's not him, it's that the world and reality are not as he always believed. Obviously, this concept changed considerably and he thought that the objective perspective of a character like Murdoch, who we could follow along and figure things out at the same time he did, would be more intriguing. And that original character didn't completely disappear. He became Walensky. He's a fairly minor role, but he definitely does his part to drive the story forward and move the characters to action. Rufus Sewell is an interesting figure. At the time he was cast in this movie, he was a relative unknown, and that actually was very much on purpose. At one point, the studio was looking at the likes of Johnny Depp and Tom Cruise to play the role, but ultimately the filmmakers liked the idea of someone who the audience wouldn't know, as the character doesn't know himself, to be who we're following along with. And Sewell's great in this movie, I love him, but I feel like he never quite cracked that leading man category. When I think of him as being like an antagonistic slimeball, like in A Knight's Tale or The Illusionist or The Holiday or The Legend of Zorro. Like pretty much anytime he shows up on screen, he's a bad guy. Even in this movie, he's set up to be a serial killer, and in the beginning you're like, yeah, well, maybe, let's see. The process for finding Dr. Schreiber was less clear-cut. In the script, he was written to be older and more refined than he is in the finished film, someone like Ben Kingsley. William Hurt was even considered before he was cast as Bumstead. When Kiefer Sutherland received the script, he thought that there may have been some sort of mistake, and maybe it was meant to be sent to his father, Donald Sutherland. And Proyas hadn't really been considering Sutherland all that seriously because it's true, like he wasn't really how he had envisioned him when he was writing the script. But he did say that he thought he was a terrific actor, so meeting with him seemed worthwhile. By the end of the meeting, Proyas was convinced. Sutherland has since said that the experience of working on that movie was not only one of his favorites as an actor, but as a person. He recalled the encounter by saying, "I met with him in a hotel and I remember acting out the part for him in the lobby. He just wanted to have a drink with me, but I wasn't going to let it go. I was walking out of there with that job because I really, really wanted it." Mr. Hand was specifically written to be played by Richard O'Brien, who of course did end up playing the part. As some of you will know, he wrote the Rocky Horror Picture Show and played Riff Raff in the movie adaptation. Apparently he would sing and perform songs for the fictitious Dark City the Musical for the cast and crew in between takes. So there are two different cuts of Dark City. There's the theatrical cut and there's the director's cut. Both can be found without too much trouble. Proyas said by the time he got around to actually being able to make the director's cut, the movie, the way he had originally intended it to be, couldn't really be fully realized with the material that they had, but it was at least a lot closer to how he wanted it to play out. Most of the changes didn't massively change the story, and the ending basically plays out the same, but it simply added further characterization via extended scenes or incorporated added symbolism that was cut for mass audiences. Yes, the film is longer, but only by about 10 minutes. But, well, There's one other change. I should preface this by saying that the first version of this film that I ever saw was the director's cut. I love the way it set up this strange, tangled up mystery, and it lays out the clues, and it's not until almost the very end of the film that Dr. Schreiber reveals the truth about the city and the strangers in a revelatory and satisfying way that finally puts all of the pieces into place. The theatrical cut doesn't do this. The theatrical cut added a voiceover monologue that basically gives away the entire plot, takes away all of the mystery, and placed it over the opening shot of the film before the opening credits have even rolled. When I first heard that, I thought that that just stank of studio meddling, like some suit saw the movie and was like, I had no idea what was happening for the first hour and a half of the movie. That's the point. You're not supposed to know what's happening. And then this was some sort of like forced compromise. And that's not a million miles away from what happened. What really was the problem was the test audience. So I grew up in Los Angeles, so I got to actually see some test screenings in the wild. Some of you will know how this works, but in case you don't, the way that they find test audiences is they stand outside of movie theaters, because these are clearly people who are interested in seeing movies, and they will give you like a flyer or something that will basically get you, and sometimes you can bring someone else with you as well, to just get butts and seats basically, and they will screen a movie. And when the movie's over, they will come by and give you a card or a form or something to fill out, and it will have questions about like what you think of characters, what you think of the story, what you think of certain plot points, maybe specific scenes, just so that they can get some feedback from random people who are coming in to see this movie off of the street. Sometimes the movie's not even done. Sometimes they haven't finished rendering certain scenes. I've definitely been in that situation before. But usually they're pretty close to having a final product at this point. And the movie tends to come out not long after, and there may be some changes that were made based on audience feedback. So Dark City had a test screening, and again, this was with completely random people. New Line wanted to cast as wide a net as they could and appeal to as broad an audience as was possible. But the random people that they pulled off the street weren't necessarily up for this bleak, retrofuturistic, neo-noir space opera they were being presented with. Like, it's just not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Although it did get an R rating, which neither the studio nor the filmmakers wanted, and when they pressed the rating panel on the reason for the rating, the panel admitted that it was just too weird for a lower rating, though they really couldn't put their finger on any specific feature. So New Line audaciously said to Alex Proyas, you've got to dumb it down. And this ended up being the compromise. No one in the cast or crew was happy about the changes. The other two writers that Proyas collaborated with, Lem Dobbs and David S. Goyer, were especially frustrated. And in retrospect, they said if they had pushed back, they maybe could have basically prevented that, but at the time they didn't feel like they could. So to recap the movie, I'm gonna go with the director's cut, the correct version. The movie opens with a shot of presumably the night sky before panning down to give us a look at the city. Many of these were done with models, and the aesthetic has always, to me, been incredibly reminiscent of Metropolis. We see Dr. Schreiber checking his pocket watch, and it stops at 12 o'clock exactly. We then meet our lead, John Murdoch, who wakes up in a bathtub. He gets out, looking at himself in the mirror with no recognition, sees a pile of neatly folded clothes, and gets dressed. As he enters the next room, he knocks over a fish bowl, and it smashes, so he quickly scoops up the fish and puts it in the bathtub. This is his save the cat moment. He finds a postcard for Shell Beach, which triggers a series of memories. The phone rings and he instinctively answers it. Dr. Schreiber is on the other end, warning him to leave because there are people coming for him. Murdoch wants more information, but he then discovers a dead woman, clearly murdered, with spirals carved into her skin. Murdoch dashes into the hallway and down the exit stairs just as the strangers arrive up the entry. So this is a fun tidbit that I got from the audio commentary. Apparently, the strangers were based on figures that Proyas had dreams about. So, you know, that's incredibly disturbing. The costuming, though, which probably is not surprising, was inspired by Nosferatu. There are quite a few of these strangers, all with odd names, but the two important ones are Mr. Hand, played by Richard O'Brien, and Ian Richardson's Mr. Book, who doesn't show up until later, but he's like the leader. Murdoch goes down to the lobby and finds several people there, but they're all asleep. Then the clock chimes and everyone wakes up like nothing happened, so he quickly leaves the hotel. The owner of the hotel enters Murdoch's room as he's late paying his bill and runs into the strangers who are waiting there. They ask about Murdoch before putting him to sleep. We're then introduced to Murdoch's estranged wife, Emma. Welcome back to the channel, Jennifer Connelly. She meets with Dr. Schreiber and he tells her Murdoch has been coming to see him because of their marriage difficulties, but had a psychotic break and lost his memory, becoming delusional and violent. He asks that if she sees Murdoch, she tells him immediately. Meanwhile, we meet Inspector Bumstead. He's a detective who's been working to find a serial killer who's murdered a string of prostitutes. The dead woman we saw is the latest victim, and because Murdoch was the one renting the room, he's now a suspect. Murdoch examines his fingerprints, but rather than normal prints, he notices they're shaped like spirals. He then enters the automat where the hotel owner told him they'd found his wallet. The clerk puts his wallet in one of the compartments that can be opened with quarters and leaves. But Murdoch can't open it with quarters because he doesn't have his wallet. He stares at it and the door springs open. He grabs the wallet and tries to leave, but is given grief by a cop before May, a sweet-talking working girl, convinces them to cut him a break. She takes him to her apartment. Bumstead notices the fish in the tub, which strikes him as odd, because what kind of a killer is going to stop to save a goldfish? Then a former detective, Walensky, comes running in, raving about how they're all trapped before being dragged away. Bumstead is meant to be taking over for Walensky after the latter went mad. Emma finds him to file a missing person case for Murdoch, but while she's at the station, she finds out he's suspected of murder. At May's apartment, Murdoch examines the contents of his wallet, learning his name is John. Murdoch notes that a young girl, May's daughter, is hiding in the corner of the room, and Murdoch is so uncomfortable that he leaves. Outside, he sees a billboard for the same Shell Beach that he found the postcard for. He climbs up the scaffolding only to be confronted by the strangers. He asks who they are, but they have the same question for Murdoch. They try to put him to sleep, but they can't. He accidentally fends them off when he makes the floor crumble beneath them, and then this fucking guy starts flying, but the strangers are shocked to learn that Murdoch can tune. The strangers share a hive mind, so they're all concerned to learn that one of the humans can tune and believe he's dangerous. They want to consult the doctor, but he hasn't reported in. Bumstead drops Emma off at home, and Murdoch's there, but he doesn't remember her or the house. He just knows he's supposed to live there. He asks her why he was seeing a doctor, and she admits she had an affair and he left. She warns him that the police suspect him of the murders. He explains that he tested himself with May, so he knows he could never do those things. She tells him she believes them, but they then realize that Bumstead is still outside, and he pursues Murdoch, who runs into a dead end. His tuning ability creates a door, and he escapes through it before it seals behind him. Hi! Are you hungry? Okay. Both Bumstead and Murdoch are heading for Dr. Schreiber's office, and Murdoch hides when he sees the other two talking. Bumstead admits that Murdoch doesn't strike him as a killer, but Schreiber doubles down, insisting he's dangerous. Schreiber, with Murdoch still trailing him, goes to a public bathhouse where Mr. Hand pays him a visit, asking why he didn't report in. Panicking, Schreiber explains that he tried to imprint Murdoch, but Murdoch woke up and knocked the syringe he was using out of his hand. Mr. Hand tells him Murdoch can tune. Schreiber vows to imprint him again, but Mr. Hand tells him not to. They have other plans for him now. Bumstead pays Walensky a visit. Walensky is obsessed with a spiral image. He claims he can't clearly remember anything, and his whole life feels like a dream. He's waiting to wake up and be someone else. Schreiber reports to the strangers through a tuned door, so Murdoch can't follow him, and Schreiber gets to work creating a concoction that he can use to imprint the citizens of the city with. He's been injecting memories into their foreheads with a syringe, essentially making them different people by giving them different lived experiences as directed by the strangers. Mr. Book questions Schreiber, asking why Murdoch is different. The doctor suggests that he has evolved and could hold the secret to the human soul, what the strangers are looking for. The strangers gather and put the town to sleep. Murdoch, however, doesn't sleep and walks around the city trying to wake the people up, to no avail. The strangers then begin to tune, changing the skyline itself, adding and removing buildings and moving others. They move selected people who have been imprinted to different locations. Murdoch watches them do this at one of the houses, then confronts Schreiber. He asks what's happening. In a fit of rage, he tunes and sends Schreiber flying back. The doctor reveals that Murdoch has the same ability as the strangers and can make things happen by willing it. Schreiber says that he can teach him to harness the power, and together they can stop the strangers, but the strangers are approaching and Murdoch runs off. Mr. Book learns that Murdoch is becoming powerful enough to counteract the tuning of the strangers. They task Schreiber with recreating Murdoch's memories and imprinting Mr. Hand with them. Mr. Hand sees Murdoch's memories, according to Schreiber, including the murders. Meanwhile, May is harassed by the strangers, and Mr. Hand, acting as Murdoch would, kills May. Murdoch examines the postcard again and finds it's from Uncle Carl, so he goes looking for him. Murdoch meets Walensky at a train station, and he learns that Walensky also woke up once while the tuning happened and it drove him crazy. After talking to Murdoch, he steps in front of a train. Emma recognizes May's apartment as the one Murdoch visited, and she enters it asking if anyone's there. She finds May's dead body there, but when she turns to run out of the room, she instead runs into Bumstead. Murdoch finds Carl, who's very excited to see him, and shows some slides from his childhood. But one of the slides shows Murdoch with a burn on his arm. But Murdoch doesn't have a burn on his arm, so he knows that this has to be a fabrication. Bumstead and Emma find May's daughter and a drawing she made of the strangers killing May. Bumstead later drives Emma home, and he admits he can't remember key memories. They return to her house just as the phone rings. It's Carl letting Emma know Murdoch is at his house. She and Bumstead rush out to meet him. Mr. Hand, with Murdoch's memories, realizes he must be with Carl. Murdoch tries to escape as the strangers tune the city around him, and Mr. Hand divulges that the strangers are trying to become like humans. They need to survive. An action sequence follows in which Murdoch continues to outmaneuver the strangers. Just as they have him surrounded, Bumstead pulls up with Emma and Murdoch leaps into the car. Bumstead interrogates Murdoch back at the station, but Murdoch begins asking his own questions like when did he last see something in the daylight? Bumstead becomes angry, insisting there must be an explanation, so Murdoch begins tuning, making an item float. Emma goes to Dr. Murdoch, glass partition separating them, and Emma apologizes, but Murdoch insists she has nothing to be sorry for. She never had an affair, and they were never even married, having only met last night. Emma seems to believe him, but insists she feels love for him. He breaks the glass and kisses her before the guards drag him away. The strangers arrive at the police station, putting all the cops to sleep, but when they go to collect Murdoch, he's gone. Murdoch finds Schreiber at the bathhouse again, asking for information. Schreiber is only giving him pieces of answers, but confirms that Murdoch's not a murderer, and he added false memories to Mr. Hand's imprint. He insists Murdoch let him imprint him, but Bumstead, who broke Murdoch loose, stops him. Murdoch asks what's in the syringe, and the doctor says it has all the answers. The trio gets in the car, and Bumstead and Murdoch ask how to get to Shell Beach. Schreiber refuses to tell, so Murdoch uses his tuning ability on purpose for the first time by torturing him. So that's disconcerting. Schreiber tries to make a run for it, but they stop him and force him into a boat to row the rest of the way to the beach. Schreiber tells Bumstead and Murdoch everything. Here, it's a satisfying reveal rather than an exposition dump before the audience gets the opportunity to piece together any of it for themselves. The strangers don't have the capacity for individuality, and their race is dying. They believe that if they can become more like humans, they can survive. Since Murdoch has evolved to tune, they believe he is the link between the races. Schreiber, by agreeing to work with them, was allowed to keep his scientific abilities, but forced to remove everything else. Which honestly is like really dark when you think about it. Proyas in the commentary also mentioned the fact that he thinks that, originally this was supposed to be an older character, but it's somehow more tragic when he's younger because he didn't get to really live at all. They reach the place Shell Beach should be, and it's simply a mural painted on a wall. There is no ocean. Murdoch and Bumstead break the wall, revealing that the city is in outer space. This is like the coolest reveal in any movie ever. Like, I really do not understand why people don't talk about Dark City. The strangers arrive with Emma, and Bumstead fights with one of them, but both are sucked into space. Before dying, Bumstead sees the truth. The entire city is on a traveling spaceship. Mr. Hand threatens Emma, so Murdoch surrenders and he's put to sleep before being taken to the strangers' headquarters. They need Murdoch to become a part of the hive mind, so they're preparing to shut down the city forever as they no longer need the other subjects. Schreiber is brought in to inject him with an imprint of the stranger's memories. Instead, the doctor switches out the syringes, giving Murdoch fabricated memories in which Schreiber has inserted himself. Through the memories, he teaches Murdoch how to tune so he'll be more powerful than the strangers. Murdoch is able to break out of his chains, frees the doctor, and sends the strangers flying. Mr. Book is the only match for him. The city rises and falls around the pair as they battle, levitating over the rubble. Mr. Book throws a dagger at Murdoch, who stops it with his mind, flips it around, and stabs Mr. Book. This sends him flying back into a water tower, which bursts and kills him. Schreiber congratulates Murdoch, but he just wants to find Emma. Schreiber admits to him that she's not Emma anymore, she's been re-imprinted. But that Murdoch is basically God now, so he pulls all the water together and wakes the citizens, restoring the buildings as he passes them. He's making Shell Beach as best he can. He then rotates the spaceship so the city is facing the sun, and finally reaches the ocean. And here the long legacy of movies with shots of Jennifer Connelly standing at the end of a pier begins. Emma, now Anna, stands alone and he approaches her. He asks if she knows the way to Shell Beach. She says she's heading there herself if he'd like to join her, and so they walk towards Shell Beach together. And this is how the movie opened when it was played in theaters.
First, there was darkness. Then came the strangers. They were a race as old as time itself. They had mastered the ultimate technology, the ability to alter physical reality by will alone. They called this ability tuning. But they were dying. Their civilization was in decline. And so they abandoned their world, seeking a cure for their own mortality. Their endless journey brought them to a small blue world in the farthest corner of the galaxy. Our world. Here they thought they had finally found what they had been searching for.
I'll admit it doesn't take as long to explain as the other recap, but my god. So the film's theatrical release bombed. It barely made back its $27 million budget, with $27,257,061 made at the box office, and that is worldwide, despite it having some positive reviews from critics. Roger Ebert in particular was like a staunch supporter of this film, and I'll link his review in the description box. He even did his own audio commentary for this movie. I haven't gotten the chance to listen to it yet because I was already listening to the director's commentary, but like Ebert's not really known for doing audio commentaries. He did like a half a dozen ever, and like one of them was for Citizen Kane and one of them was for Casablanca and one of them was for this. Luckily, since the movie was originally released, it's built up a bit of a cult following, and the DVD sales are what eventually led New Line to asking Proyas to do the director's cut. The tomato meter currently has it at 78%, and the popcorn meter puts it at 85%. And every time I've had a conversation with someone in person and this movie has come up, they have raved about how much they love it. The following year, 1999, another little sci-fi movie was released. I don't dislike The Matrix. It's fun. I respect what it did, but I bring it up because everyone on the internet has felt the need to talk about The Matrix when they're talking about Dark City. And there is a decent reason. So The Matrix was obviously a huge hit, which like that's an understatement. It was a cultural juggernaut. And it completely eclipsed Dark City, and that does feel kind of unfair for a few reasons in particular. But given the timeline, I don't think that it's possible for The Matrix to have, on purpose or not, ripped off Dark City, which is what a lot of people have alleged. It's hard not to see the themes they share, how the lead's character's reality is not what they believe, and there are some startlingly similar scenes. Someone on YouTube did a side-by-side comparison of the phone call from Dr. Schreiber and Morpheus early in Dark City and The Matrix, and it's actually wild. But if they look similar, there's a reason for that as well. They both had Peter Doyle, a visual effects colorist, and other key crew members in common. And Doyle did actually admit that the Wachowski sisters saw Dark City before it was officially released, but they weren't like worried about it or anything. They just kind of like laughed it off and were like, oh, that's kind of funny. Like, it's very similar to our movie. The Matrix also used some of Dark City's actual sets, including very notably the city rooftops. Is it unfortunate that only one of them is remembered? Yes. Is it The Matrix's fault? There's not really any evidence of that. Well, there actually already is, kind of. There is a 20-minute short that Proyas made called Mask of the Evil Apparition. It came out in 2021, and it supposedly takes place in the Dark City universe. You can find it. You have to subscribe to Vitaverse, which is a Proyas-sponsored streaming service, but it is on there. I did watch it. It's really weird. And it is very different. Like, fair warning if you're going in hoping that it's going to be Dark City 2, like it's not. I can guarantee that a movie studio would not have touched this thing with a 10-foot pole. And while Dark City does have like some horror trappings,
We use your dead as vessels.
this leans way into the horror genre. And it had to me like some serious Alice in Wonderland vibes as well. And while we don't see any tuning from the lead character, she is being chased. So there's the possibility that she has some other ability. This is something that we didn't really get to explore in the first movie. You know, we only really were focused on one corner of the city and this very small specific group of characters. We don't know who all else is out there and what all else they could potentially be doing. And then there are the baddies, which are very reminiscent of the Strangers, except whereas the Strangers are, you know, completely bald, these guys actually have really long hair. So that made me wonder, it's like maybe they're like a different but similar race of aliens. When they were working on the script, Proyas and the other writers did talk about what a potential sequel would look like. We don't know where the spaceship was going, and they thought that they could explore that along with the potential for corruption that would come with Murdoch's power. Though Proyas did mention again in the audio commentary, he liked to think that Murdoch wouldn't be corruptible. The thing is, we're pushing 30 years at this point, so I don't think that Dark City 2 is ever going to happen. Even with the fan base being built up since then, I doubt that we're ever going to get a sequel. However, while promoting Mask of the Evil Apparition, it was doing the film festival circuit. And granted, this was in 2021, but Proyas said that he was in the very early stages of developing a Dark City series. He didn't say if he was developing this with any particular network or streaming service or anything like that. So I don't know. And whether or not it'll happen is a big question mark. Again, this was a while ago, but I found this information while I was at work and I barely held it together. Unfortunately, we haven't heard anything since, so we'll just have to wait and see. And until next time...
Never talk to strangers.